with us for a little while longer. We'll get started as soon as Mr. Arthur returns. No, we're waiting for all to be here. I'm calling to order this public hearing for the Council Bluffs Community School District Board of Directors. This public hearing is regarding the Longfellow Elementary School tuck pointing and various roof projects. Let the record show that all board members are present. And Dr. Murillo, would you lead us on this portion of the public hearing, please?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm going to ask Mr. Wilson to join me at the podium. He is going to introduce Ms. Stacy Pettis, who will come up and share with us some insight to the Longfellow and the various roof projects. Mr. Wilson?
Thank you. So Stacy Pettit and Kim Bogatz, I guess if needed, from HGM, is going to talk to you today about a tuck pointing project we have at Longfellow, and then we have some various roofing projects, sections of roofs at our various buildings that they would also like to address as well. And the purpose of it is to let you know what is needed, and then hopefully have you later in the session vote to send out bids. Stacy?
Board. Dr.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hopefully you're all doing well. Okay. As Dean mentioned, we do have Kim Bogatz here from HDM if we have any technical questions after we do the presentation. So let's get started. Our first public hearing tonight is bid 19-023 Longfellow tuck pointing. This project basically includes the repairing of approximately 20% of the brick surface on our 1939 Art Deco portion of the building. Currently, we are seeing mortar deterioration around the upper second story of the building. We are requesting unit pricing as well as the 20% for additional work if needed, and we will ask the contractor to provide weekly updates to keep the project on task and on budget. For those of you who are not familiar with tuck pointing projects, it's the repair of the mortar joints due to weather abuse over the years. Typically, the contractor will grind out down to a uniform depth, and then they will come back and fill with new mortar. We can expect about a 25-year life expectancy with the tuck pointing project like this. Over the last few years, we've done similar projects at Kern and Wilson, and we'll probably be looking at a few other projects in the near future at potentially Bloomer, ALTJ, and Roosevelt. The estimated cost for this project is $35,400 with a 10% contingency for a total project cost of $38,940. We're anticipating paying for this out of Pebble. If this project is approved to go out to bid, we will be receiving bids on August 13th and hopefully be bringing them back to you for board review on August 21st. And then with that, if it's approved, we will hopefully have them on site right away with the project being completed by November 15th. Okay, moving on to our next project, which is bid number 19-024. This is a public hearing for 4 roofing projects throughout the district, being at Longfellow, Roosevelt, Thomas Jefferson, and Tucker Center. The first project that we're going to look at is at Longfellow. This project includes about 1,349 square feet. It's currently got a ballasted roof that's about 21 years old. And if all goes well, we would schedule it as soon as possible with the completion of November 15th. Our estimated cost for this project is $19,000 with a 10% contingency for a total of $20,900. The next project is a very small roof over at Roosevelt. It's about 189 square feet. This roof is 23 years old and will be the last last roof at Roosevelt, hopefully for a while. We want to schedule this one as soon as possible with a completion on November 15th as well. And we're estimating the total cost for that around $8,000. Moving on to Thomas Jefferson, we actually have several smaller roofs at this site. We have area E4, E5, E6, and E7, which is the yellow area down on the C wing, if you're familiar with TJ. This is a ballasted roof, and it's about 26 years old. We're looking at starting this project in June of next summer because it's a pretty big project over a lot of classrooms. So we would have a completion date before school on August 10th. This is about a $140,000 project. And then finally, we have Tucker Center. We have 2 area roofs over the building of approximately 8,624 square feet. This roof is currently 33 years old. It's given us a long life, and but it's seen some better days. We're looking at scheduling this one as soon as possible. As most of you know, the Tucker Center folks are moving out, so there won't be any students in that facility. It'll be easy to work on. And hopefully we'll have that one done by November 15th as well. This project is approximately $113,520. With that being said, the overall total project cost for all of these roofs is $284,048 to be funded through our Pebble account. We have a similar project schedule as the tuck pointing one. We would send that out to bid right away if approved this evening, receiving bids on the 13th and bringing it back to the board on the 21st. And then we would have the contractor mobilize at the schools that we can start at right away. And then project completion would be August 10th of next summer. With that being said, are there any questions?
Any questions from the board?
We have Kim here too. She looks lonely back here.
I'm obviously not paying attention. We're not going to have students in Tucker Center this year? Where'd they go? I forgot.
Remember, we're moving our students out to the Iowa Western campus, and they're taking their culinary and health science courses out there. We're moving our automotive and diesel to the 2 high schools, and then we have the other 4 tracks that will be in our new trade works.
So what are we going to use this building for in the future?
Facilities is moving into this building, which will be a great place for them to be, especially taking care of our stadium. Yes.
This also opens up our old facilities building for technology because they need a home. They're kind of like wandering all over the place right now, and we need to get them a permanent home.
And for storage.
Sorry, I
And storage,
must
yeah.
have missed all that. Okay.
You're okay. I've got just a couple on, is there a concern what type of cement that we're using for the mortar? Because I know that sometimes the newer cements have different strengths, and I guess our concern would be to make sure that what we're doing to protect the brick isn't in fact destroying the brick.
No, we will actually work, there's a restoration companies that we will work with to make sure that we'll
So
be
they'll
satisfied.
analyze the type of mortar that is in the joints currently?
Correct.
Okay, okay.
Yep.
And then will the ballasted roofs return as ballast roof? We're moving away completely from ballasted
We're moving
roofs.
away from the ballasted roofs. We're going to go to an EPDM,
Right.
20-year warranty.
Right,
type
okay.
roof.
All right, that's it. If there are no other questions from the board, we'll move forward to the public. If anybody in the audience wishes to address the board concerning questions regarding this public hearing, now is the time and place. Seeing no one move toward the podium, we will take this up at our regular board meeting that follows immediately. We're adjourned, and now we are in the regularly scheduled workshop meeting for the July 23rd. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Arthur? Present. Dr. Agra?
Present.
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Present.
Mr. Minshall,
Present.
Mr. LaFurla,
Present.
Mr. Kazire.
Present. As you are able, would you please rise with me to observe a moment of silence? Thank you. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before us now is the approval of our agenda. Is there a motion?
I'll move approval of the agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. And the motion to approve our agenda has been approved. Next up is the approval of our work session and workshop business meeting of June 25th. Is there a motion?
I would move approval of minutes from the work session and workshop business meeting of June 25th.
Thank you.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion, additions, corrections? Hearing none, before us now is the approval of our minutes for the work session and workshop business meeting of July 25th, 2019. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign, and the motion is carried. Before us now is public participation. If there are members of the audience who wish to address the board at this time, please make your way to the podium, state your name, and we'll move forward then since there's no public participation. Next item is the superintendent's report, and we don't have anything on that, so we'll move on to student achievement.
Great, thank you. At this time, I'd like to invite Ms. Julie Smith and Mr. Mark Schultz to the podium. They're going to present tonight on our 2018-19 school culture survey data. We're pretty excited to have this data because it gives us some really good feedback, and we're also able to use that to see kind of where we've come from and where we're heading. I think we have 2 years of data now, so we're continuing to follow this. So at this time, Ms. Smith, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks for having us here today. Just as a reminder to start off, we are using a survey company called Panorama to survey our teachers and staff on culture in our buildings. Previously, we used Humanex, which was more of a business model. And then last year, we switched to Panorama, which really focuses in on schools and how schools feel about things. Happy to say that this year we had a 79% participation rate between our teachers and staff, so we felt that that was a really good representative of what this data is. And the other thing that is really nice about this data, and you'll see here, it enables us to show comparisons at a national level against other schools like us. So we'll see some of that data as we look up. So there are 6 categories that teachers are surveyed on and 4 categories that staff are surveyed on. So teachers are all certified teachers in a building would be able to participate in the survey for that building. And staff includes paraprofessionals and office staff. It does not include custodians or nutrition staff because a lot of this is about school leadership relationships and things and supervisors, and they are not supervised by building principals, and so they are not included in this information. For teachers, there's about a total of 50 questions. For staff, it is about 35 to 40 questions. And the 2 categories that are starred are the ones that staff are not asked about. Otherwise, the questions are identical in the other 4 categories. So the sample question, this is a sample question that you can see up there. Within each category, there are about 5 to 7 questions. The top 2 answers that are in bluish right there really are what they consider favorable. So people have to feel extremely or quite something in order for it to be favorable. When you get down to somewhat, which could be considered in many surveys favorable. In this survey, it does not. They really want the top two categories. And the last two categories, slightly or not at all. One of the things we're generally finding about that is in those two categories, about 6 to 15% of our people answer in those two categories. Otherwise, most of the things that wouldn't be considered favorable really fall in that somewhat category. So that's just kind of background information. The data that you're going to see only reflects the top two categories as favorable in there. So, I want to talk a little bit about this chart. First, just to look at this chart, if the blue column is last year's data, it's the spring of 2018 data. The green column is spring of 2019 data. You see a little bit of a grayed out area that's in the 40th to 59th percentile. That would be considered right at a national average as compared to any school across the nation. So when we're looking at this, we're going to talk about each one of those data points here in a second, but I just wanted you to kind of be able to get a read of that chart going in as we're doing that. So the first category up there is educating students, and what that really assesses are teacher perceptions of their readiness to address issues of diversity. So the questions really around there are how ready do they feel to address different types of kids, different cultures in their classrooms. And you can see last year we were above the national average, and this year we were even more. We were in that top band of the national average about how teachers are perceiving their ability to deal with diversity in their classrooms. The second category up there, and we're going from left to right, is teaching efficacy. And that is teacher perceptions about their professional strengths and their areas for growth. So the questions are all geared toward that. And as you can see, we're right at the national average last year and this year. So we feel pretty good about those two things right there. The third area is school leadership. And school leadership is about the teacher perceptions of the school leaders' effectiveness. So this is how they are seeing their leaders and how effective they are. And we rank nationally right at the average as well, both last year and this year. The next two we'll delve into just a little bit more. That is staff. The next one up there is staff leadership relationships. We abbreviated it just to relationships here to fit it on the chart, but it's staff leadership relationships. And that's the teacher perception of how the relationships between their staff, their faculty, and the building leaders in the building. So last year we were below the national average in the 20th to the 39th percentile range, and this year that increased up to the national average. And so that's something that we think is a great celebration for us. The second one, feedback and coaching, and Mark's going to talk a lot about what we've done around feedback and coaching this last year. But again, we went last year, and that really looks at the perception of the amount and the quality of feedback that teachers receive, that teachers and staff receive. And so, again, that also went up to that next level with that. One of the things we noticed as we were kind of looking at different buildings, when one went up, both went up. And what we are kind of thinking is that when you have those face-to-face, really good discussions around what's happening in the classroom, the relationship grows between those two. And so that's why that's one of the things we're attributing the bump with relationships into is what has been done through feedback in the district. And the last area we're going to park here for a little bit because it's an area of concern, and that is around school climate. And in this survey, school climate means a lot of things to a lot of people. But this survey really is that perception of that overall learning and social climate. And I'm going to share with you some of the questions that teachers answer around this so you can get that idea of what they're looking about when we're talking about climate here, because it's kind of out there for a lot of people and we really don't know what it means on the same way. So there's 8 questions that teachers answer about this. The question that the teachers answered most favorably was, how optimistic are you that your school will improve in the future? And 68% of our teachers answered that, and that either they're extremely sure or quite sure that it's going to grow in the future. And only 10% of the teachers were in that very bottom part with doing that. So we thought that was really a pretty nice thing with that, even though, and that was our highest one. Our one of most concern, or that the teachers responded least favorably with, was on most days, how enthusiastic are the students about being at school? And 44% of the teachers were in that quite to extremely, and only 15% were in that lower two, but there was a big bunch in the middle that they're somewhat enthusiastic. That was the lowest question that was on there. Other questions include things like, how supportive are students in their interactions to each other? How positive are the attitudes of your colleagues? How respectful are the relationships between students and teachers? How often do you see students helping each other without being prompted? So that's some of the examples of the types of questions that are asked to determine climate, just so you kind of have an idea on that. Mark is going to talk a little bit about our next steps with that, so I won't go into it, but just trying to explain some of the data. The next data set we're going to look at is the staff data. And here, honestly, we were disappointed because we didn't see the growth, and as a matter of fact, we saw some drops in that. The biggest area of concern really was around feedback and how much feedback do staff receive on their work. And it was really about a third, a third, and a third. A third were in that top two, a third of the staff were in the very bottom two, and a third were right in the middle. And that was really not like what we saw with the rest of our data when we looked at some things. So we know that this is an area we really start, Mark will get into that, about what we need to address. The good news on the feedback, though, was that what they felt about the type of feedback they were getting was pretty good quality. So that was some good news on that piece of feedback on there. School climate, again, you can see there were, I'm sorry, I'll start from left to right. With school leadership, there was a drop in that from the 1 percentile range to the other, but we're still within the national range. And as I mentioned before, that relationship between feedback and coaching and leadership relationships, you can see both of them reacted similarly here. And so we're really working on that feedback and that with our other staff is going to improve that as well. And school climate and on this one is in the national average and maintained in the national average. So Mark is going to come up and really kind of delve into our work around feedback this year with you.
Good evening, Dr. Morello and board. Really excited to share some of our data, school's data on feedback. So last year was we launched a focus, district-wide focus on feedback. And we really went all in, did a lot of professional development for principals on what feedback is. We read a lot of research and a lot of books on feedback, why it's important, and how it helps us get better. And so we landed on that priority. And so through that professional development, we learned quite a bit on how to engage our principals in that. Steve Gehring he coaches Julie and I, and he works with 4 Points. And he really helped us this year in monthly coaching and helping us learn a framework to give feedback to our principals about their practice. And so we started with the leaders of the buildings. And improving principals' feedback through us, they were able to, through their observations of teachers, having the conversation, giving feedback in that same framework. So we really, they're learning from us, we're learning from our consultants, and it's been very helpful. So in the Panorama survey around feedback, there's 3 questions that we pulled out, and we set some personal goals around and some targets. And those 3 questions are posted here. The first question is, how often do you receive feedback on your teaching? And that's really about that frequency. Second question is, how useful do you find the feedback you receive on your teaching? And they're all very important questions, but that one's critical for us. If a principal is going to take some teacher's time and sit down and have a conversation and share some feedback, we want it to be quality and useful so they can use that to improve their practice. That third question is, how much feedback do you receive on your teaching? That's really the amount and the volume of that. So those 3 questions, when we give the survey, these 3 questions, we give it 3 times per year. And since we were on trimesters, we get at the end of try 1, try 2, and then at the end of the year. And so we had some benchmark data throughout the year to see the improvement. So let's take a look at our results. As Julie shared earlier, the blue columns, that would be last spring of 2018, and that lighter green would be spring of 2019. So that first question on frequency. Julie and I, one of the first things we did was really working with principals to get into their routines and their schedules and their calendars to get into classrooms and prioritize their time to get into classrooms, see what's going on, observe instruction. So it's very important to get that set up. And so this frequency, you can see it improved quite a bit from 38% of teachers saying, and remember it's quite or extremely positive, all the way up to 49%. So about half of our teachers are saying, yeah, my principal, our leaders are in there frequently giving us feedback. So that was a great improvement. And so that next question is on quality, which we know is very important because timing is so important. Because we always say that's one of the most important resources we have in school is time. And so the quality of the feedback improved slightly from 55% to 58%. And remember, those are the top two highest. There's still that band of that somewhat, but we're really improving there, and in comparing to the national norms, we're doing very well there. Now that third question on quantity, that's the volume and amount of feedback. And so frequency is, and our goal there with frequency is that every teacher in the district is getting feedback from their principal a minimum of every 3 weeks. So every 3 weeks they're coming in, observing instruction, sitting down, having a conversation, talking together. And as Julie shared that data, that's helping with relationships too, because they're sitting down and talking about teaching and learning. So that's the frequency, and we know we're improving in quality, but the quantity is the amount of feedback they're getting in those individual sessions. And the data here is telling us that that improves quite a bit. So we're very pleased with the increases around these 3 questions, which we set as goals. And we're going to continue, though, that focus next year to improve. We actually have 3-year goals where 80% are some targets there that we want to get staff saying in those top 2 categories. And even though they say, yeah, somewhat, or they're pretty pleased with it, if they don't say those top 2, we don't consider it positive. So we don't have very high expectations for that work. So I want to share some highlights. Julie shared those 6 categories, and these are some individual questions that we're pretty pleased with, because the teachers responded that they were quite or extremely confident in these. So that first highlight is, how easily do you find interacting with students at your school who are from a different cultural background than your own? So 93% of our teachers chose those 2 highest categories or question stems on those. Very proud of that one. The next one, how thoroughly do you feel that you know all the content you need to teach? Very important to have high content knowledge, and 83% of our teachers said they're quite or extreme on that. Next question, how respectful are your school leaders towards you? 79% were those top 2 question responses. How confident are you that you can meet the needs, the learning needs of your most advanced students? So 76% of our teachers chose the quite or extreme confidence in doing that work. And then finally, a final highlight here is, how effective do you think you are at managing particularly disruptive classes? We had 71% of our teachers choose quite or extremely confident in doing that work. So pretty pleased with that, those highlights there. Those are just a few of those 50 questions that they're asked. All right, so some next steps here. As Julie shared that climate data, it didn't drop, it didn't increase, it stayed the same. We want to improve that. And so our work together, when we're coaching principals, we're going to engage our principals in that building data around climate and dig deeper in those questions and identify some action steps at the building that we could support them with implementing to help improve the climate at each of the schools. The next step is, she also shared that data that we weren't very pleased with the staff data as much as we were with the teaching around teachers. And our principals super focused on teachers because we were on them. We're like, get in classrooms, observe instruction, and give them feedback. And we saw that data increase. But we also know that it's important that everyone gets feedback about their practice, not just teachers, but also our paras and our secretaries and other members of our school. And so we're going to continue to work with principals to help prioritize some time to get into the other areas of the school, not just the classrooms, but also when they're seeing paras. And as you may know, we've reorganized our organizational chart, and it's given us an opportunity, Julie and I, to actually work with our SAMs. Since we're chiefs of schools now, it makes sense that we're going to be supporting SAMs. So one of the things that we're going to do is provide ongoing monthly professional development to our school administrative managers that align with the PD that principals are getting too. Because because they're building leaders too, and they work a lot more oftentimes with our paras than the building principal does. So we can align that work and help increase the frequency of the feedback. And we know that if they're sitting down and giving feedback, that it's going to impact the relationship too. And I think also it's probably going to impact the climate of the school at the end of the day. So, it's always good to have conversations with people, share some of the things they're doing well, and then give them some ideas on how they can improve. So we're very excited about the next steps. So what questions do you have for Julie or I about, she's trying to hide back there, Julie too, about our culture data for this past school year?
Questions from the board?
So I guess on the climate, for the school climate, was there like a difference at the level of buildings, like elementaries, did they have better responses than, say, like the high school that might not see as many of the students, or different?
There wasn't like an across-the-board difference saying, oh, elementary's high, secondary are low, but there were differences within those categories. So some buildings were higher than others and whatever, but it really wasn't like straight secondary or not, or, by feeder school or anything. There wasn't really a pattern that way.
So were there areas where we could see correlation between teacher responses and student responses to surveys that made sense? Or those that didn't really make sense at all?
The student surveys that they take are really on a whole different set of categories and things like that. And so we don't have any student data that reports directly to some of the things that might correlate with that. We do have some individual questions from some surveys, like how well do you like school? That comes from the Oveus survey, that would loosely correlate, but students are not given any of these type of questions on a survey format.
And there's no questions that correlate between school climate, teacher responses, and student responses?
There are some, like in the Oveus one, but we haven't honestly done like a dive into looking to see, is it being perceived the same way? Our principals did do a data dive into what students are thinking about through the Oveus and through Conditions for Learning survey. Thank you. To look at some specific questions around how students are feeling about school. And so that also is part of the thing that they take into when they're looking at school improvement, and are there things we need to do to change that perception? And kind of back to Mr. McGlade's question, it runs the gamut through the buildings and through the levels. So, and some of those surveys really only go down to 5th grade or sometimes 3rd grade, so.
And this is basically a workplace survey, yeah? Yeah. So not necessarily, it's called a school climate survey, but it's really a workplace satisfaction survey.
Yeah, and that's right. And that's why we think it's so important that we continue to develop leadership and improve the leaders of buildings, because that really sets the tone with the culture and the climate. And so the more effective that our building leaders are, the better the workplace is going to be.
What type of survey do we have for those that aren't educators to measure that satisfaction?
You mean like our paras?
Custodian,
Nutrition.
Right now we don't have a current survey we did with HumanX, they took the same one. But Gary that's in the works, I would guess, we would say, with looking at that. But right now, there isn't a current one that we could share that with.
And that's because it's showing principal or administrative ties, leadership, correct?
Yeah, and Mr. Milborn has an action step with HR to develop that, because we saw that as a gap.
I'm assuming the principals don't take this survey?
Correct. They don't take the survey.
Yeah. I'm curious to know.
It'd be an extreme score, I would hope.
I'm curious to know, since it was a big focus last year to work with principals and prioritizing their time, and did you collect feedback from them and how they feel like that strategy went?
Yeah, and we actually, our coach, Steve Gehring, he had some listening sessions where he sat down with all the different principals. He did an elementary group and a secondary group, and he felt it was probably going to be a little bit more honest if Julie and I weren't in the room. but it was extremely positive. They shared extremely wonderful feedback to him about our work with them and the focus around feedback. And for some that just didn't have those routines, because there's managers of the school, they're comfortable managing, making sure it's a very well-run school. And then it's that whole instructional leader, you know, the comfort going into the classroom, and then looking at teachers and saying, okay, you're doing this really well, but then having that conversation about, well, this could get better. Being able to learn strategies on how to have that conversation in a very positive way, that's the feedback they gave us, that they feel better about doing that work. Before, it was just like, we'd say, get in there and give them feedback. They're like, well, how do you do that? So learning how to do that, they shared with us. They were very pleased with that.
So when you roll out a new initiative next year to focus more time on feedback for non-teaching staff,
Yeah.
they'll be excited about that?
They will be. But that's the key. It's not another new initiative. It's just, we're going to stick with feedback until we don't need to stick with feedback anymore. Until we're amazing at it. We're going to stick with it. We're not going to bounce around.
Some of the areas where we were surprised by results. Did we have any other indicators that tied to that we were seeing within the schools all along, or no?
I think we were most surprised that some of our staff data dropped. You know, and looking back in hindsight, I think, the thought was we're really focusing on this, so we'll see a growth. We really didn't anticipate by not focusing on something, we would see a drop on it. We thought we thought it would maintain a little bit, or maintain the same, without that. So I think everyone, when we started looking at that data collectively as a group and in individual buildings, that was the biggest surprise, is that we had some drops in that, in our staff that we didn't. And I would say the leaders in our district feel a sense of urgency that that's not okay, that those things dropped, and we need to work. But I don't know that we had anything that led us to believe it was going to happen prior to that, and so that really was kind of a surprise to us.
But also, Julie, the one thing that in the principals' meetings when we began to talk about this data and everyone was looking at their data, the other piece that really came out was the staff was not sure they were just measuring the principal. Were they speaking to the SAMs? Were they speaking to the support staff, that was the leadership that was coming into the building? So they weren't really clear, which we're going to make sure that's real crystal clear next year of who the survey's speaking to. Is it speaking to the SAM? Is it speaking to behavior consultants? Is it speaking to any of our curriculum specialists? It's speaking just to the principal is what it's asking. So it was a little muddy there, that we're going to clean that up too.
What percentage, or what's the difference between the turnover rate between staff and teachers? I mean, I'm thinking, when I look at this agenda tonight, we have a bunch of people to approve that are non-classified.
Yeah,
And every board member, it's 4 to 1. Wow.
we do.
And that makes a difference in how you evaluate from year to year, in my mind.
Yeah, our paras are very fluid. We are constantly looking for paras. We're constantly looking for, not as much as our school secretaries, administrative staff. Our teachers stay pretty solid. Our administration stays really solid. We're also looking for nutrition and for our custodial staff. So it does turn over. And paras are one of the great need that we have. But we also know that they can sometimes earn more at other places than being a para. And once the para becomes that calling and they get attached to a student, they stay. But I do know that we do have a high rate of turnover.
Well, I just think it's a factor to consider when you're analyzing the data. The other suggestion I'd like to follow up with Dr. Ogrice is, I think we do need feedback from our custodians and nutrition people. In my experience, they give you the best input ever.
Yes, and I know that Mr. Milborn has a 3-year plan, which might be a good idea, Mr. Milborn, to do a presentation on that, because we were concerned when we left the prior assessment tool, but it didn't really get us to the heart of teaching and learning. So now he's got the goal, as we were in the transition of HR, to bring something back that will still get everyone's voice. I know we have to focus on student achievement, and I know that your world is very important, but we do need, and he knows that is a need, so he's working on that.
Well, we have no further questions, but I'm sure we'll continue to monitor this, and thank you for the input. We appreciate it.
It takes guts to do this, too,
Yeah,
so I appreciate that.
right. Yeah, we wanted to be transparent. We wanted you all to see where we're moving toward and the work that's being done. And it's also that there's still a lot of work left to do that we're committed to. At this time, we'll move to our informational presentations. And pretty excited that we have a guest here tonight. But no, I really do appreciate the work that Brent did and the communication. The board approved last year for us to go into a partnership with the city, the chamber, and our county to have a lobbyist that just was up in Des Moines, just focused on Council Bluffs. And that was super important to when I got here, because the district I came from had a lobbyist for the board, and we had another one for the district. So to know that we had someone with boots on the ground up there besides the associations that we are a part of. So tonight, they're going to present on the 2019 legislative summary and a discussion of the 2020 legislative priorities. So Ms. Ostrowski, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good evening. And I'd like to set the stage just a little bit this evening before we invite Mr. Segrist up to visit with you. We are annually asked by the Iowa Association of School Boards to present to them from your board perspective, what are the highest priority areas for the next legislative session? We're thinking, oh, what about the timing of this? Well, 2 months ago we finished the 2019 session, and we had some review, point by point of how the action at the legislature will affect us this coming year. Mr. Segrist will go into more detail with that tonight to help inform our discussion about the priorities to submit for next year. So our goal for this part of the meeting is for you to get a good sense for where we're at, where we might be focused on for next year, and then later in the meeting there'll be an opportunity for you to pass a resolution with four priority areas that through consensus and discussion tonight we're likely to list. So that hopefully will inform how we proceed this evening, and we will be brief, but we want to be informational and help set the stage for those decisions. Mr. Segrist. Brent.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I appreciate the opportunity, although we all agree that Dr. Morello is an outstanding superintendent. She could have been a perfect one if we'd had this on a patio outside someplace tonight. But, we'll take this, I guess. I think it was very important that the community finally tried to get a better feel for what's going on in Des Moines. Luckily, they decided they'd like me to do it, but I think for a long time, Council Bluffs has not been as vocal and as unified as they should be at the Des Moines level. We still spend plenty of time fighting amongst ourselves, but I think it was a real positive to be able to say to people on the Education Committee, I represent the Council Bluffs Community School District, or I represent the City of Council Bluffs. It's kind of nice to have that. As far as I know, only Des Moines has their own lobbyists also, because they've got some significant different problems beyond what we have. And the organizations you belong to, be it SAI or ISB, do a nice job, but it's still nice to be able to react to things as a Council Bluffs entity as opposed to a bigger thing, because we have different problems here than they do in Hamburg or whatever it may be, or Des Moines for that matter. So I think it has been positive. So I know these were your legislative priorities last year. I'll quickly go through things that happened with that. I'll point out a couple of other things, and interrupt me at any time if you have any questions about anything, and then we can talk about whatever's on your mind. As you know, the SAVE extension went through. It was about a year late. It should have been done the year before, but for various stupid political reasons, they didn't pass it the year before. But they did get it done this year. It was overwhelmingly supported. I think they weakened it by increasing the amount that they were taking out for the property tax, the fund, whatever it's called. I don't have it on the top of my head now. I think that they were playing around with that, and I think they probably put more there than they needed to be. Having said that, the amount of money that this is going to raise over the extension of the next 30 years is substantial, and so I think it was an extremely important piece of legislation to get through, and it did have almost unanimous support. So That's done, it's signed, and you can move ahead, and you're doing that at the Mall of Bluff and so on, which, by the way, looks great now. The outside looks great, and I think if you ever have any fundraising, you ought to go to those 2 restaurants inside the mall, because I was out working out this afternoon, and all those construction guys are in there eating lunch. So, I mean, I think they got to love Council Bluffs Community Schools for that. So that was done, and that's done. You know, I mean, that's been a focal point for this board in particular for about the last 5 years. And so now it's done. So now we move on to other things, which would be your other priorities. The protection of school funding for public schools, that would basically be the ESAs, educational savings accounts, the efforts that would take money and put them into private schools. They will tell you that, of course, it wouldn't affect public education, won't affect K-12, would it be other money that we have? Well, 2 things. One, that other money could be used for public education. And number 2, once you start it, doesn't mean that they aren't going to take money away. I will say this, and I know school boards don't like to hear this, but they can't pass it. They cannot pass full-blown ESAs. They don't have the votes. They haven't had the vote for the last 5 years, in my opinion, and I think you've seen that. They can't even get out of committee. Could the Senate pass it? They might be able to pass it. The House at 53-47, they just can't pass it. Now, that doesn't mean you don't remain vigilant. I think that remains one of your priorities. But I'm just saying, when people get pretty excited, the votes aren't there. I mean, I know enough of those people from my previous career, and there are people there that would dismantle public education. Make no mistake about it. But a bunch of them still feel that public education in Iowa is still pretty good. So I think that's a great priority to have. Nothing happened this year. And they're going to keep pushing it. It's a national push, but I just don't think the votes in the House in particular, they just don't have the numbers that they can pass it. There's still enough right-minded and right-thinking people that won't happen. So nothing happened this year. I think they even tried to do a pilot project and haven't been able to get that passed. If they ever get, that'd be the camel's nose under the tent, if they ever got a pilot project. And they've talked about doing one rural district and one urban district, and they picked Waterloo, which was a mistake because the superintendent up there just really took after him. But that is an issue for you to, and the education chair in the House, Walt Rogers, lost his reelection effort, and that was a big part of it because he was pushing very strongly for that. And then he's no longer in the legislature. And then he ran for an open Senate seat this last session. He got beat for that also. So I think a lot of them are politicians, and they understand the downside to that issue. And so, again, remain vigilant, but I don't think it's going to happen next year. Timely, equitable, and adequate school funding. The SSA last year was 2.06%, which is still too low, better than it has been the last several years, but still too low. The budget, and I can have more details on that if you like, the budget's in pretty good shape. So I think you continue to push for a higher SSA than you had this year. It's very, very important. This is an election year. The Iowa House is definitely in play. It would take 4 seats to change party control. And again, my experience, my 18 years in the legislature is in election years, they tend to be a little more flexible. And so I think there needs to be a good push on to try to get the SSA as high as possible. But the fact of the matter is it starts with the governor. And so whatever the governor recommends, whatever it is, to go above what the governor recommends in the budget is difficult because she presents a budget and they give it to the legislature, and whatever she has earmarked for SSA, if I want to make it higher, I got to take it from someplace else in the budget. That doesn't mean they won't do that. They did that with community college funding this year, which I think was a positive. But I think that's an issue that the statewide organizations and all the schools of the state needs to be pushing hard on. The budget's in pretty good shape. The flooding isn't going to help. The trade wars aren't going to help. But nonetheless, the budget exceeded expectations, and it looks pretty good. So I think we need to have a strong push for as high of an SSA as is possible, and hopefully higher than what we had last year. So that's got to be across the board, not just the governor. So when you have that time and you see legislators, please bring that up for them. And you also had the equitable and adequate school funding. They did increase the transportation and student equity amount. They increased the transportation from like $7.9 million to $18 million. That's not as big of an issue here, but it is in many parts in the state. And, of course, the $5 per pupil for school equity fund, for pupil equity funding, and they intend to continue to work towards those issues in the next year. So I think those are also, they did talk about those this year. They did some action on those, and that will be something they'll be looking at again next year. Full funding for statewide voluntary preschool, really didn't hear much talking about that. There is obviously a pretty good statewide preschool system that's there that's funded okay. It could be a higher weight, but I didn't really, to be honest, hear much talk about moving beyond that this year. A few people talk about it, but it really wasn't an issue that came up much during the last session. Funding for mental health supports for students. My last career that I retired from as the executive director for the area education agencies across the state, I spoke to superintendent groups, in all the 9 AAs. And every one of them, every superintendent's meeting, the number one problem or the number one concern was student mental health. The legislature gets it, but at this point, they haven't been willing to spend a lot of money on it. They did make 2 very positive steps this year. They did set up the system for children's mental health across the state, mimicking what they do at the adult level. And that, House File 690, it's a great first step, but it doesn't do squat if they don't fund it. And they put some money in it, but the proof will be next year is whether or not they actually fund it. But the skeleton that they set up, the structure, the framework they set up is very positive. And so hopefully they'll follow through with that next year and put some money in it. They did put some money into training for teachers for mental health concerns and to see them for the students. I believe, if I recall right, the governor recommended $3.1 million. The Senate wanted like $1 million, and they settled at $2.1 million, which a lot of people assumed would go to the DE. It went to the area education agencies. Now, I'm biased there, but I think that's absolutely the place it should have gone. And so you'll see the AEAs across the state doing statewide training, using that money to be training teachers in the mental health supports that they will need at the K-12 level. So positive, not nearly enough, but positive steps forward, I think, in those 2 areas. And hopefully we'll see next year that they'll do even further. And then given all the hoopla with the privatization of Medicaid and the firing of the director, I think this is going to become even a more high-profile issue in the next couple of weeks. I think it's actually going to get pretty ugly before it's all done. So that will be a big issue going into next year. Other than that, there were a few other, small issues that were out there. Financial literacy. A couple of times, Dr. Morello would, the Urban Education Network would contact her and said, can Brent go talk to these people? And I think we delivered every time they asked whatever we needed to do. But they did delay the financial literacy curriculum by a year. The legislature was pretty concerned. That was actually kind of a battle because they're like, you're just trying to delay it because you don't want to do it. And that wasn't the case. You just have to be able to work your way into that financial literacy curriculum, and it's very, very important. So they did delay it a year, and I think all the educational groups thought that was reasonable, so that was something else that we did get in there. And then I know the school boards will be looking, and they'll tell you that they had some success last year with what they'll call local control or increased flexibility and things like that. And I do think that's an issue for you as a board. If there are things out there that you find worthless or time-consuming that really don't do much, I do think the legislature, and that would be both parties, are interested in saying, here's some things we could cut out. Now, the problem is, last year they thought they might cut out school nurses and things like that. They go too far. But as a board, if you see things that will give you increased flexibility, particularly as it relates to, the bureaucracy, if you will, I think they're willing to listen to that. So that might be something that you want to talk about at a later time of how you might be able to go to them or come to me and say, here's some things that we think we could eliminate. I know at the college, and I'm on the board of trustees out there, we tried a few things this year to get rid of some things we thought were overextending what they needed to do, and we had some success with that. So I think that would be something that you could look into also. So those are just some of the issues. I don't know what else you would, if you have any questions or like to talk about any of those, I'd be happy to do that.
Questions from the board members?
So what I thought I heard you say was that maybe we don't focus any more energy on SAVE this year and eliminating the sunset altogether. Not worth the time right now?
No. That would be it's good till, 49 or 50 now. I'll be dead probably. So, Grove, you're too ornery to die. sure, so, but, no, I wouldn't. And actually, 5 years ago, when Martha Bruckner was superintendent, started fighting it, even then, they're like, come on, it doesn't expire for another 15 years or whatever, and I think that's the response you would get.
Yeah.
And what you can do by bonding out to 49, I think you're in pretty good shape. I wouldn't do anything with it. It would be, I think that would be the advice you'd get. And I know at like the school board level and SAI, those educational levels, I mean, right now, they're looking.
What might be our priorities for this next year? I hit the wrong thing.
Well, I was gonna suggest, are there any others besides the 4 that we didn't get done? Those last 4 look good to me.
Yeah, we had a bunch.
Yeah, you may have some ideas, and if you do, that'd be fine. Again, if the Council Bluffs Community School District had something, I mean, whether or not, what you're doing here, I believe, is for IASB, and then they go through the delegate assembly and so on. But if there's something this board wanted to do, and assuming, and I think that I'm gonna be back doing this next year, I believe the partners have all said they'd like to do that, that'd be something you have specifically, then we can work on that up there. But I think these here are what you're looking at right now, and the first 3 are what makes sense. Yeah, I mean, and I will tell you, and having spoken to some of the people from the other education associations, I mean, those 3 are what they're talking about. I mean, it's kind of like it's gonna be a take a breath year. And it will be. It will be an interesting year, again, because politics are going to enter into it. But with the House being at 53-47, I can tell you the Speaker's going to want to do the budget and a couple other things and go home. Now, whether or not the Senate Republicans, and they're all Republicans right now, whether or not they agree with that, because they're a little out there sometimes, I can say that stuff because I used to be there. I mean, they have they have a big majority, and what happens with the big majority is you get a lot of ideas because you have all those people there. I served as a majority leader when it was 51-49 and when it was 64-36. 51-49 is a lot easier because when you have so many members, then they all have grandiose ideas of what you can do. So I'll tell you, the House will want to do the budget, do a few things and go home and start campaigning so they can try to stay in control. So it'll be a session where I don't think you'll have a lot of priorities coming out of the legislature. So I think what you're looking at there are pretty good ones.
So Brent, I wanted to explain to the board
Yes,
why
please.
the number 4 is something that I had been thinking about. The governor put Future Ready Iowa out there, but all of the funding is going to that post-secondary, and very little, if anything, is coming to the K-12. And right now, our foundation, our school's foundation, helps us with our summer credit because the state doesn't do any reimbursement for any credits attained during the summer. And with our early college and then our trade works, we're going to have students on the campus during that time. So I want to nudge them to begin to think differently about how they award their dollars for college credit, and that school systems, K-12 school systems, are not just educating and preparing students for the future during those 9 months. And so I really wanted to see something different than just doing the same and see if we can get some traction and get some conversation going. And I'm hoping that it will get their attention. So that's why number 4 is a little different.
And you had the governor down to Schoolworks, right?
Yes.
Well, and Dr. Murillo, I know, is presenting, I think, Thursday at the college. We have the statewide community college trustee conference at Iowa Western starting tomorrow. And she's going to do a presentation, I think, on Potawatomi Promise, and maybe it's on this. I don't remember.
We're doing, not Potawatomi Promise, but we're doing the early college trade
That's right.
works.
Somebody else
And
did
then health,
Potawatomi Promise.
science, and our culinary. So our partnership.
And I will offer this to you, and I don't know what your schedule is on Friday, but Friday we have a legislative forum, and the Pat Grassley, who's the appropriations chairman in the House, he's a good guy, and he's going to come over, and if I'd probably carve out 15 minutes for you to meet with them to talk about this. I think they'd be interested in that. they are looking for some things that are positive that they want to do. It's refreshing once in a while that they do that. So that might be, I'll talk to you maybe tomorrow about that, but we could put you in front of him, that might be good, so. So, I mean, in terms of your priorities, that's up to you, but I can tell you from what I'm hearing, that all those would be spot on for what you would want to do. I don't know about the fourth one as it relates to ISAB and what they'd be interested in, but I know the first three will be right in the wheelhouse, and so that would be good. And then, whenever we're in the process, again, assuming I'm back there next year, which I think I will be, if you ever have any questions or whatever, you can call me directly or go through the administration to get you any answers. And I believe you sent out the weekly updates to everybody, so hopefully you find those interesting. Those take a long time to write, because it's like why I'm not on Twitter, because you really have to carefully say what you want to say to get the point across without making everybody angry. Something our president doesn't have that same problem, I guess, so. Tweeting, so. There you go.
Okay.
There's
No
more
further
I
questions?
appreciate the opportunity, and I think it's great. I'm sure you're going to
Sure.
have a scintillating remainder of the meeting, but I think I'm going to go out and enjoy it.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the presentation. We appreciate your work. We will be taking this up during our resolutions as so we'll have time for discussion on what direction we wish to go as a board. So before us now, then, we have the potential reclassification of the activity programs.
Yes, at this time, I'd like to invite Mr. Tim Hamilton to the podium, who will be presenting with our two fabulous athletic directors from Thomas Jefferson and Ale High School. So, Mr. Hamilton, the floor is yours. And as Mr. Hamilton's getting prepared, I know many of you, or all of you, know Mr. Novotny, but I don't know how many of you have met Dustin Detterdeen. He is our new athletic director at Thomas Jefferson High School and has started off just doing some incredible work down at Thomas Jefferson. So welcome aboard, and thanks for choosing Council Bluffs to be on the team. Ready?
Yeah, I had people saying actually that we should just let Dustin talk this whole time, but Jeff and I are not going to let that happen. So we appreciate the time. I've shared with you in Friday Notes, and I shared with you in the board packet some interesting reading about reclassification of activity programs. Before we start off, I want to say that we're really just looking at this from the state level. We believe that our conference that we play in, the Missouri River Athletic Conference, it's a great conference. We're not looking to go anywhere else. We're really looking at this from a district and state perspective, okay? Our goal tonight is we want to share some information with you, with anybody who's listening. We want to be able to give you guys a chance to ask some questions. And then later on this evening, we're going to ask you to approve a resolution that we're going to send up to the athletic unions that asks them to look at school classification in a different way. But before we get into that, before we can say they should look at it differently, I asked Mr. Novotny to come and share kind of the history of our classification and how it works currently.
Thank you. Thanks for having us out.
You bet.
I'm not a bullet reader. 1906 was the first time there was any state-sanctioned tournament in the state of Iowa. It was a track meet, and it was anybody could come. You didn't even have a district meet to qualify for that state track meet. There was no classification. Everybody competed against everybody. I forgot who the state champion was. I tried to look, did a little research here in the last week or two, but I do forget that. You can see my first bullet, 1953. So for about 50 years in the state of Iowa, that's the way it was. There was no classification at all. Everyone just competed against everybody. But you think back then, we definitely did not have the population we did now. We did not have socioeconomic issues like we have now. Girls' athletics were not even existent for most of that time, if not all that time. So probably no need for a classification system. But in 1953, that's the first time the Athletic Boys Union or Boys Association decided that they needed a classification system. And also track and field, they took the track and field meet that year in 1953 and broke it up into two classes, a large school class and a small school class. I forget where the breakup was, the 400 somewhere. But that's a key number because from 1953 to right now, probably 70 years, let's just say, that is what we use. That's the sole purpose for what they use to determine classes in Iowa for 70 years. And it has come along a long way in 70 years. Population has probably exponentially grown. Sports, many more opportunities in that time. Girls' sports, now we have a girls' union, so we're dealing with not just the boys' association, but the girls' union. And to describe, some states are very easy with classification. They'll just say, hey, top 32 teams are your big classes, the next 64. Our state's very, in my opinion, proactive. They look at every sport a little bit differently. They look at how many schools participate, and they'll break up those lines in various sports in different ways. Just a couple quick examples. Football, they changed in 2017. Now the biggest class in football are the top 42 teams. It used to be the top 48 teams. Boys basketball, it's still 48. Bowling, you can see my third bullet. We are in the largest classification in all sports except for bowling. The cutoff for bowling, because there's not quite as many bowling schools in the state of Iowa, is 30. So that's why we are in the second class. I also put our BEDS numbers. What a BEDS numbers is what they use. It's your 9th through 11th grade enrollment. So once we put our enrollment figures to the State Department of Ed, they send them over to the high school athletic associations. Next year, AL's 33 and TJ's 34. So that's back to back. That's probably how it should be. Pretty close in numbers there, 980 to 951. So we'll be sitting number 33 and 34 when they do classification for this current school year. Last bullets, and this is a pretty important bullet too, because this is where, if you decide to send that resolution, I am sure this committee, and it might change a little bit, depending on the pressure, or I shouldn't say pressure, the input the state associations get. A classification committee was formed in 2008, because classification has always been a hot issue. It's really heating up right now, but it's always been an issue. So they felt they needed a committee that I think meets every other year. That was formed in 2008 to look at different issues in classification. So that's where we're at. So this classification system we've had for 70 years based solely on school enrollment, is it still working? Is it still giving us a level playing field? That's the question, and that's why it's a hot button right now. And Tim referred to some of the information you've been given in your Friday notes or in your board packet. It really started with the coach on the other side of the state who knew it was an issue. A lot of us know it's an issue. He did a lot of research. There's a lot of research in that article. I'm not going to go through every single point of his, but he basically summarized it in 2 points. One point is he thinks there should be a lot more classes. In fact, I think he said 8 classes. We're not here to address that issue. That's up to the state. They like their even numbers, obviously, for tournaments at the end of the year. That's up to them. But the one that we are here tonight talking about is the socioeconomic aspect that he brought up in that article, that back in 1953, when the state decided that school size was a big enough issue, is it a level playing field? No, it wasn't. So they decided to come up with a classification system with school size. In 2019, socioeconomic is a big enough issue, and it should be determined in the level playing field. And 2 pieces of data. The first one he collected, some Des Moines public schools, who, by the way, have signed a resolution. I think they were the first UEN board to sign a resolution. There's some of their data. Speaks for itself. I had a couple calls when this article came out in the Des Moines Register, like, no way is that true. I'm like, well, I think it is true. 0-92 in the last 10 years, and this is football data. The average score 51-10. So what we did, went back in our stats. We do not play as many 4A suburban schools because most of them are located in the Des Moines area, but we do play some in football. We are 3-53 in that same 10-year time period, and the average score, I guess we're a touchdown better on the giving up touchdowns, 45 to about 11. So pretty significant data on the lack of success we've been, at least in football. We don't have data for every single sport, but I can tell you with my opinion, looking at different sports, sure there are outlier years where we've had success, but overall, when we go up against some suburban schools, it's not always a level playing field. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Dettering. He's going to show you some things on what some other states have already done.
Thanks, Jeff. Good evening, Board.
Good evening.
What I want to do is kind of just share with you guys that this type of discussion is not just happening in Iowa. And so if you look kind of across our nation, there's a lot of states that are beginning to re-examine that classification system that they're currently using. Colorado, for example, is looking at socioeconomics, demographics, safety, success, or lack thereof. enrollment trends and participation rates. Colorado's even taken it another step to where they're not just doing a blanket classification amongst all sports. So you might be class 4A in football, 3A in volleyball, and so forth, depending on where you fall, considering all those factors. Washington, Minnesota, and Ohio have kind of developed, and it's a formula that's come up in Nebraska as well. It's a multiplier formula. So what they do is they look at the state average poverty line, and then based on where your students fall percentage-wise, it actually can either increase your enrollment numbers, so they add numbers to it. So you might be a smaller school with a smaller amount of students, but you'll actually be in a larger classification based on this multiplier formula, or vice versa. If you fall below that poverty line, you might drop a class or two. Is there a perfect formula out there? I don't know. That, again, as we kind of talked, we don't have all of the answers. We just want to foster that discussion at the state level to consider and encourage them to take that deeper dive into a system that, again, hasn't seen change in over 60, almost 70 years now. Because as technology and everything has come along and data has improved, to just take that deeper dive and consider what it might look like if other factors were brought into the equation. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Hamilton.
I think the key point that Dustin said is we're not standing here in front of you today with a solution. We are really just asking you as a board to send a resolution to the state unions saying, can they look at reclassification of schools? Is there a better system? And if they truly look at it, and if they truly say that right now, based upon strictly enrollment is the best option for the state of Iowa, we're going to support that. But we know that it's been done in other states, and we know looking at the data that the level of play isn't as equitable as it could be. So again, our next steps is what we're asking you to do later is to approve that resolution that's in your board packet. We want it to be transparent and we want it to be fair for all students. Our students work really hard. Our student athletes work really hard. We want them to be able to feel like they have the same opportunities as everybody else in the state when it comes to all of our activities. At this time, I'll open up for any questions.
The board.
I get that we're just requesting a different look at it, and I get that, and I 100% agree that something needs to change, and agree that our kids have access to far fewer resources than kids from Urbandale or whatever. So I fully support this, but just to address a question I have about maybe a potential downfall if socioeconomic status or demographics like that are used in a calculation. Do we run the risk of being, okay, well, you're in 6A with all the other poor kids?
I think that there's risks in whatever is done. But I think what we're asking is for the people who deal with this every single day, who are on the executive board of both of these unions, to really look at that. Our enrollment we're already sitting, like Jeff said, 33rd and 34th out of the state. So I don't think it can just be social economic. I think that there has to be other factors that are involved with it.
Yeah, and Tim, let me follow up on that, because the presentation at the UEN and then the next meeting that we're having the 1st of August, this is an agenda item again. And it's not to ask them to change our conference, but it is asking them that after we get out of conference into districts, into state, that it becomes more equitable and it's a level playing field, being that it's not just your top schools waiting that keep coming out, but that our children going into that districts and into the state are seeing that same opportunity that they can compete. And I think by looking at those other data points, we begin to look at that equal access. I was talking with the team as we were preparing the PowerPoint, and I asked Jeff about the investment. One of the great things that you all did here before I got here was invest in middle school sports and invest in building that feeder program. And that's one step, but we know we're competing against other areas that are starting at kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, all the way up. And we want to ensure, and besides other big schools, when we get there, what our students are having to come in to compete against, And some may say, are you lowering the bar for this? No, we're creating opportunities for success for all students. Not meaning that I'm taking it away from a large school that has had a great feeder program and has, 100 down the line and they only play one side of the ball, and I got 20 down the line and kids are playing both sides of the ball. And sometimes when you look at that and talking with Superintendent Ahar at Des Moines, he is saying that kids sometimes will choose or elect not to go out because they know they have to play both sides of the ball, and they know they're coming up against teams that are going to be 100 down the line, and I'm on one side of the ball. And we watched even Cameron this year at TJ play other positions on both sides of the ball because we couldn't field enough. And so how do we, success breeds and continues to grow, where defeat sometimes begins to tear down programs that we can't build. And I'm looking at this as an opportunity for our students to see they can have success. It is enjoyable. I think we even had, trying to think of our young man that went to Graceland, who could have played football and could have been out there. But when you look down the line and think about it, should I stay with basketball then and not play football, even though I love it? But I know I could get hurt because we don't have as many, and we're not going to win as many games as I would like. Those are things kids are weighing out nowadays that used to, you just showed up and played every sport because you loved it.
Yep.
And so I'm hoping this will help. And Jeff, you've been in conversations, because I asked Jeff when I come back and met with him, would he help me really dig into this so I could understand it?
And to address your question, will it put us in a class? I don't know the formula.
Right.
There's a lot of good things different states are doing. Our conference, just let's look at the 8 teams. And I reiterate, because some people don't quite understand, this really doesn't affect anything until you get to the end of the year on who you're going to play to maybe get to a state track meet, maybe a district track meet who comes, or the tournament that's set up to go to football or basketball. So we're going to still play the teams in our conference. We're still going to play the smaller schools, bigger schools, depending on, I sit down with every coach and we look realistically at, what talent do we have, how good we're going to be. And if we're going to have a pretty good season, we'll play anybody. I mean, we played Valley in basketball, boys basketball this year. We bring Waukee to our baseball tournament this summer. But our conference, back to your point, we have 5 very urban schools in our conference, both Council Bluffs schools and the 3 Sioux City Public. Probably free reduced rate, all above 50, if not a lot higher. We have 3 that I would call suburban in our conference. One's a private school, Bishop Heelan. Sergeant Bluff, who sits right to South Sioux City, whose socioeconomic is quite a bit lower than Sioux City Public, and Lamar's entering next year, which is about 15 miles out of town, but again, socioeconomic low, but their enrollment's quite a bit less than us. It's a great balance in our conference. Our girls basketball last year, 7 teams in our conference, any given night, anybody could win. And that was what was so great about it. I talked to Chad Shaw, my coach, I talked to Devin Schoenig. It was exciting. Every Tuesday and Friday night, girls basketball, and teams would beat each other, and the next week someone would beat somebody, and it came down to the wire, and that's what we're looking for. A competitive situation at the district and state level where our kids go in and think they have a fighting chance. Hey, if I play my best, they might be better than me, I can beat them.
Right.
In this current classification system, I can't always say that happens. And that bothers me as an AD, it bothers parents,
Right.
it bothers kids. I mean, think about going on a field and maybe in the back of your mind thinking, I can play the best game of my life. They might play one of their worst games and still might not have a chance to win.
Yeah.
That's really, when I think about classification and reclassification, that's the core issue when it hits with me. So.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Have there been any like rural districts or rural schools that have done any of this at all?
Are you asking about in Iowa or?
Passing like a resolution, yeah, in Iowa.
Really, this has been presented to the urban education, to the urban education network, so it's really truly affecting the urban schools more than any other school. So.
Tim. Told me not to talk too much. Their issue is more the private versus public, and we have a
Okay,
very small
that's-
private school in this town, so I'm not going to get real specific.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean.
but-
I don't need to ask that question.
If you're
I
a
got
small
that.
town in southwest Iowa and you're playing a district tournament against a school the same size as you, but private, in a suburban area with the resources of that is their argument. So
little
their
more
argument
selective, yeah.
probably is still part of this discussion at the state level, but that's really not the private versus public in the large class really is not the issue. It's more the urban versus suburban.
And then, has there been any push to do this with like other activities? Like, I mean, it would still impact things like show choir, band, orchestra. And not quite to the same extent probably, but still relevant.
Yeah, I think the football is obviously the most, it's the highest profile, so, but if we're looking at doing it, the unions represent all of those activities, so they would be
Okay.
able to do it through all of them.
How is our participation rate in, at TJ&AL for athletics?
I'm gonna let them answer, but I will say, I have to apologize because I submitted a Friday note last week that actually had all of that for you, and I submitted it to the wrong person. I was on vacation, so you'll actually get that information next week, or this week in the Friday note, but I'll let these guys answer.
We're about 50. And, you know, in researching this, and if there's a way I can do it, I will certainly try to do it. I would like to even break that down and look at our participation rate from kids who maybe are or are not on free and reduced lunch. Because I'm totally guessing here, would be our participation rate in athletics, musics, all the activities would probably be higher with kids who are not. And that's a problem. I mean, we want to give opportunities for every single kid. And that would be definitely, but looking through this data and really talking about socioeconomic issues and how it's affecting classification, I would love to see that data at AL. And we've never broke it down with like that before. We break it down male, female, we break it down by grade. You'll get my report. But overall, you know, with the 1,300 kids we have about 600 some, and it's pretty flatlined over the last couple of years. But when you do look at that, we had a great senior class at AL, but it was they didn't participate much. So we're really excited about this year coming up because in a lot of our sports and activities, we did not lose a big number of seniors, but we have a great big freshman class coming in. So we're looking forward to our numbers going up participation-wise.
The state of Iowa does not currently have a waiver for those that are on free and reduced lunch for sports physical, is that correct? And you have to pay for it.
Yeah, and our community's been great, trying to give those out free as much as they can, but you are correct, that's local control, trying to get it done at a local level, there's no statewide waiver.
Might be something to think about. Mission.
So how do we couch this discussion when people in the community ask about this? Because I feel like there's parts of me hates this. Right, because it says, you know, your kids, you're okay. We will not use poverty and mobility issues for unacceptable achievement. Yeah, you're good student athletes, but you're not quite as good. And some of that, you know, football comes on the size and and the training and all the private coaches and I mean all those things that other groups get. But I do feel like it's, you know, we've talked about the needs for better feeder programs and putting a focus on this in our elementary schools to really drive kids to want to be out and be physical, so that by the time they get to high school, they're staying in our schools. And if I go, oh, you know what, maybe I will. You know, now I would not. Is it going to put us at any disadvantage anymore against local schools?
I think I would answer that. You know, I have kids within this school district as well. You know, several board members either used to or currently have kids. The thing about it is its opportunities, and whether you say socioeconomic or whatever it is, when you look at kids who, in an urban area, there's a higher rate of mobility, there's a higher rate of single family homes. I mean, the factors that go into it, it's more than just, it drives so many other things.
Yeah.
And when you look at, we have youth sports programs here. I'm on the board for one of them. When you look at what it costs to play, and even there's financial aid, like that's one factor. The other factor is, how do you get the kids to practice 3 days a week? How do you get them across town if you're working? I mean, there's just a lot of other factors that go into it. So I guess if my answer would be, if you're asked out in the public, like, what does this mean? What are you saying, we're not good enough? No, we're not saying that. We're saying we may not have as many opportunities. And we just want to make it a level playing field. Sports, you all know, sports and activities build kids up in schools. To answer the question statewide, when I went to the athletic directors conference last year, the numbers are going down statewide as far as participation. That's the answer to the question. But we know how important it is for kids to participate in those things. So anything we can do to increase that participation, I think, is really important.
And again, I want to state, we're not asking them to change our conference. We're only asking for them to level the field and think about it differently when they get into districts and state. And that's the shift. It's not to change our conference. Because, what is amazing that you brought that out was when we did this and worked through this presentation, Mr. Schultz immediately jumped on that. The same thing, are we saying our kids can't compete because we're dealing with socioeconomic status? And we are not saying that. We're saying they're still going to compete in their conferences. We're asking them to think about it differently when they get into districts and state. And so that is a piece that we're really asking them to focus on, because we want our kids to be successful at that district level and that state level. And we want to see them have success and have that pride, and we want to have that school pride around that area. So that's really our focus.
I guess I'd just ask if this is, we support this, but go that we also not forget that passion and commitment to it, to develop those leaders and those kids who just never give up in life that we get from sports.
I think it might bring back the passion, because it's telling kids they do have the opportunity to, not telling them, but it's giving them a chance to actually succeed in the postseason, a little more of an opportunity. And I think you might see it more in Des Moines than here, but I would guess that a lot of the kids that are in the inner city schools in Des Moines that are exceptional athletes are probably leaving those schools and going to the suburban schools.
Sure.
And I would hate to start seeing more of that happen here.
There are lots of factors. You guys have brought some up, whether private or public recruitment, whether we say it happens or doesn't happen. We have open enrollment where people can go to other school districts that they want to. I mean, there's a lot of different things that go into it, and kids leaving, and again, our goal is to just ask the state unions to look at other factors.
Just say a private Catholic school in Iowa City, that's 1A. I don't know if they really going against Red Oak or some small town in like southwest Iowa that it would make sense. They're still from a giant urban area. It's just people that can afford to send their children there.
Just, I'm sorry, just one last thing. And I'm devolving a little bit here, but we've talked about the importance of youth sports and organized, within their neighborhoods and their schools. What can a school board do to support the growth of really quality youth sports programs in Council Bluffs? And I'm putting you on the clock. No. I know that's a tough question to answer, but
Look, girls soccer went to the state tournament this year. A lot of factors go into that. One is a great youth program in the city with soccer, and having our student athletes get involved at a young age through the middle schools. Even though we don't offer soccer, those girls are out for athletics, and then having good coaching and having some talent, all goes into that. What can a school board do? Just support the community, encourage the community to get involved. I know we have a free youth girls basketball program that a great doctor in this town, Christian Jones, started 11 years ago. He still helps run it, even though both his kids are out at West Point. Chad Shaw, my head girls basketball coach, absolutely free. We struggle for numbers. We struggle to find parents who want to coach. So just encouraging parents to get involved in their kids and giving them those opportunities. I think I have little kids. They're both at College U. One's going to be at kindergarten. One's going to be at second. There's opportunities there. And I was just talking to Jaleesa about this the other night. She's going to coach basketball this year because we have to get involved. I mean, we can't just sit there and expect somebody else to coach our kids. We need to get involved and help out. And if every parent gives a little bit and get student athletes involved, that's just promoting that and pushing that in any way you can. Specifically, I can't think of anything that comes to mind right away, but really just getting our parents at those youth levels to get involved in the programs the Y offers, the programs the city offers, the select programs that we offer here in the community.
yeah, I get all those things. I guess I was, just to be more specific, earlier we talked about some barriers that some of our families face, making a choice between allowing my kid to play soccer or buying groceries or whatever those transportation, those other barriers. I just wonder if there's anything that, as a district, that, we might be able to do, or, to help organize other community partners, maybe to address some of those barriers. Because we can get more involved as individuals, we're still not making a difference for those families.
So what if it's just promoting what we're offering, promoting our different programs and our different feeder programs, and really going out? I think there's a lot of parents right now who carpool kids and run kids all over and support all this on the backside. And there's a number of different little feeder programs that fund or come into our high schools. And I think maybe just, is there a easier way to communicate that amongst the different partners within the city, maybe get the word about what we're doing?
I think a couple things that we could do. We will get a list, because we have, even with the programs at TJ and AL and Cobra, and I mean, there's a lot of different programs out there. We'll compile a list of what our kids are doing, so you have those, and I'll share those with you here in the next couple weeks. And then I'm going to ask that Jeff and Dustin reach out to their coaches, and they're talking to these youth programs. I mean, if you go to any of the schools, they're there all the time. I'm going to ask them to reach out to those coordinators of those youth programs and ask them. Because the fact that the board is sitting here and you're asking what you can do is awesome. So I'm going to have them work with those coordinators and just ask that question. I think it's, they may have better solutions than what we have, but we can come back and share that with you down the road.
If the sports physical is a barrier, then I think we as a district need to utilize our resources that we have, our nurses, and our community partners, and create a drive where students come in, both high schools, both middle schools, to get their sports physicals done free of charge, and they're in an activity. I don't know how we facilitate that. I will help you as best as I can, but that barrier needs to be gone. And if we can't fight the state of Iowa, then we do it in our district and we make a motion.
Also I'd wonder about, we've over time taken away things out of our elementaries, taken band, we give them little bits of band and orchestra and things like that. We pull those activities out. And if you want feeder programs for everything, I think that's we've had this discussion many times about, musical education for kids as a way to, or as a path to future success. I think we need to look maybe at a lot of things we do that develop the whole child from elementary on through high school.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moves us directly into our resolutions portion of tonight's meeting. Before us first is the approval of the proposal for 4 Points Education Partners for leadership development for the 2019-2020 school year. Is there a motion?
I would move that the board approve the proposal with 4 Point Education Partners as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move directly to the vote for approving the proposal with 4 Points Education Partners for the 2019-2020 school year. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
And I've opened the online voting.
Yes, sir.
Mr. LaFurla,
Yes.
Dr. Ogres,
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Mr. Grove,
Yes.
Mr. Arthur,
Yes.
Mr. Kazire.
Yes, and the motion has been approved. Before us now is the contract for our project manager through Meyer Building Solutions. Is there a motion?
Yeah, I move we approve a contract with Meyer Building Solutions to manage the renovation project for Kern and Wilson Middle Schools for the period of September 1st, 2019 through August 31st, 2020, in the amount of $144,000.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Motion and a second. Any discussion?
So they were approved last year to manage this. It's just a funding piece for that now, is that the concept?
No, I just did a year's contract,
Oh,
so
that's
this is every year that we're doing a contract with Myers. So The rate and everything did stay the same, but I did add 6 hours. And the reason for that is because we are moving to a third building now, and I would love to see us get this building bidded by November, if possible. So there is gonna require some additional work around that. And so the extra 6 hours a week was to kind of pad in case I required more work, or it required more work than what we had done just for the Madison and Kern. And hopefully everything will be smooth, but we will still have to do some things to prepare Madison as we flip it back for Wilson. So we've still got 3 buildings on our hands as we continue through this renovation.
And so then, how does this tie into the future, or the pending one on number F, about the commissioning services on these buildings?
Right. That commissioning service is for a specialized group to come in and work solely on and ensure. In talking with Mr. Myers about adding this service and his recommendation for the next one, and I don't know if this is appropriate to do this.
We'll discuss that when we get to
Okay,
that
perfect.
resolution. So we'll answer those
I
questions.
guess I'm just curious why, it seemed to be, to me, like there'd be some overlap here between these.
Is it that Mr. Myers
Should be.
is more like managing the project?
Does not have
versus
the specialized knowledge to, he can, again, Dave, I'm getting off
Right.
track again.
We'll answer all those questions at that time. And so this in itself, this contract is in and of itself a separate contract from the commissioning services.
I get that, I'm just saying, that would seem weird to prove one, never mind.
Yeah, we'll get there, and it'll all make sense when we get there.
We're spending, what, 60 million bucks to do these 2 schools? Approximately?
We're spending about, not 60 million.
35.
Yeah, we're
About 40
spending about
million.
40
Yeah.
40 million.
40 million on each?
Together.
No, together.
Together.
Combined.
Yeah.
Right. Plus,
My point is, this is a service we're paying $144,000 for, to manage that kind of investment. It's pretty small.
And I don't
Please.
know how you all feel, but I really have been appreciative about the management of the Madison campus and the work that has started at Kern, and really feeling secure about procurement, making sure that we are in compliance and meeting all state laws. And I really feel like the relationship too between BVH and the superintendents that are running these 2 buildings right now, we will take possession of this building by August 5th, the Madison campus, and begin to move in. And one thing that we have is we have a fantastic directors of our facilities. And by having Mr. Myers here, she has been able to manage for us then the CTE program, the parking lot program, the roofing programs that you see coming in, plus ensuring that our buildings are ready on the inside and outside to receive students on August 27th. That is something that really has lifted some stress off of Stacy. And I really feel like this has been a partnership that we have been, I guess, almost like blessed to have, because we have somebody watching and ensuring that what they say they're doing, they are doing, all the way down to holding them accountable for some dents in door frames that I couldn't see when I first walked in the building, but he could see. And they are going to credit us back some money because they did not put in high-quality door frames. That's the kind of person we want walking the hallways and watching and making sure we have a quality product for our students to be in.
Yeah, I think it's critical that we have someone
Yeah.
that's just on this project, looking out for the district and making sure we're on time and on budget and.
And has a knowledge of this, of doing this work. Yeah.
there are no further discussion items. We will move to the vote for the approval of the contract with Meyer Building Solutions. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Arthur,
Yes.
Mr. Grove,
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla,
Yes.
Mr. McGlade,
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw,
Yes.
Dr. Ogres.
Yes.
Mr. Kazire.
Yes, and the motion to approve the contract with Meyer Building Solution has been approved. Before us next is the resolution asking the board to consider reclassification of activity programs. Is there a motion?
Move to approve. The board sends notification for potential reclassification of activity programs as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Now is the time for our discussion. Dr. Ogres, if you wish to lead that or be first in the discussion, it is your prerogative.
I move in favor. I don't see why it hasn't been done before.
Okay. We're ready to move to the vote for the potential reclassification of the activity programs. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes.
Mr. Grove?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes, and the motion has been approved. Before us now is some job description revisions. Is there a motion?
I'll move that the board approves the revisions to the job description as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
Is this a new position?
No.
Just to revise.
Yeah.
Just redoing it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Fringer wanted to revise.
Clean some things up, huh?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, no further discussion. We'll move to the roll call for the approval of the job description resolution. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. Grove?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw?
Yes.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes, and the resolution has been approved. Now we have an approval for the memorandum of understanding for the TradeWorks Academy program. Is there a motion?
I'll move approval of the memorandum of understanding with Jeffries Plumbing for sponsorship of the TradeWorks Academy pre-apprenticeship programs.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Is this our fifth
This-
MOU, right?
Yes, it is. This is our fifth. Pretty excited to have Jeffries join us.
So do we now have one for each of the 5 areas now?
Yes.
All right.
This completes it.
If there is no further discussion, we'll move to the resolution to approve the TradeWorks Academy Pre-Apprenticeship Program Memorandum of Understanding. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Minshaw?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. Grove?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes, and the resolution has been approved. Before us now is the resolution for the approval of the building commissioning services. Is there a motion?
Move to approve optimized systems for commissioning services for Kernan Wilson Middle Schools with a bid of $122,120.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there a discussion? Is there any discussion? And just a little bit of background. Typically in all construction projects, the administrator of the testing and balancing of the various systems, both mechanical and electrical, is included in the contract. So we're paying, pardon me, but typically it is the oversight is through the general contractor and the architect. So we're removed as the owner from having somebody who is representing us, the district, to have these testing and balancing systems commissioned. And so part of this contract is to take that portion of the contract out of the hands of the architect and general contractor and put that squarely in our field of representation. So we're hiring the people that will third-party represent the commissioning of the systems, which can affect comfort, efficiency, and operation of the building. And so it gives us a lot more flexibility and a lot more oversight on how our buildings are tested and commissioned as the architect has drawn, architects and engineers have drawn. We're going to take control of making sure our people are taking care of that and representing us from a district standpoint.
So what's the timeframe of this contract?
I'll have Mr. Myers come up and join us and talk about it a little bit. The timeframe of the contract, Mr. Myers?
Yes, the time, good evening. The timeframe for this contract would be for the duration of the renovation of Kern and Wilson. So we're looking at, 2+ years.
So they would do both buildings for us? Yes.
Is there like a time frame beyond the opening of the building where they're?
Yes, they will actually, that's a excellent question, because they will actually take us through the entire 1-year warranty period. So we would have a 1-year warranty period after we take possession of Kern, and then Wilson would be 1 year.
In the past, we had efficiency experts through Honeywell. We've had all kinds of different groups, I think, that were doing different things for us around this.
Right, which is
Time with the
really,
new building.
Honeywell was more of a maintenance and energy efficiency type situation, whereas the commissioning is actually handing over the finished product to us, saying that here are the specifications that have been laid out by the architects and the engineers. This third party comes in and evaluates how well our systems that have been installed by the mechanical and electrical contractors, how well they are performing to the standard at which the architects and engineers have submitted to us. So they're verifying that the systems are working as designed and engineered.
Mr. Meyer, will they be looking at the equipment as it arrives and then looking at it as it's being hooked up, and then I believe they'll also test it for operational, put it through commissioning
Yes,
after the fact as
They
well,
have,
right?
they have very specific functional testing that they do. This will be all the HVAC equipment, the electrical systems, the direct digital controls, and they go through the functional testing to make sure that all the contractors are coordinated together. And I'd just like to say that through my experience, 27 years in facility management, I've done countless number of educational buildings, and I've spent the first third of my career not using and commissioning and struggling for a year or sometimes years trying to get the buildings to work the way they were designed. And I think the district has some of those current problems with some of their buildings that they've had renovated. So I found through my experience that using building commissioning, you can often save, you'll recoup the cost probably several times over the next 10 years in energy and efficiency and even maintenance. I'm trying to track down some of the ghosts that were left behind by the contractors.
Yeah, I think this company saved Creighton some substantial money.
The references that I checked were outstanding. Probably the best that I've found, checking references for companies. They were all said that they would highly recommend commissioning. They would not do another major project without doing it.
Certainly, we had issues even with the stadium where we had old equipment put in in one building and things like that we didn't know about. So this is an issue that I guess I didn't know was such a prevalent need for us. For some reason, in my mind, I think when you contract to build a building and you get people coming in saying they're going to do the work, that they would do that, job.
It's probably become more prevalent, I'd say, over the past 10 years or so, 10, 15.
Especially it has, and with the LEED accreditation and the emphasis on energy and sustainability, most colleges insist on commissioning. K-12s are starting to progress that direction.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there's no further discussion, we'll move ahead with the vote for the approval of the commissioning services for the Kern and Wilson Middle School. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes.
Mr. Grove?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes, and the resolution is passed. Before us now, we have a resolution with the Green Hills AEA.
Yeah, I move the Council Bluffs Community School District approve the agreement with Green Hills Area Education Agency for Midas implementation. Sounds awesome.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion?
Yeah, so I'll just ask for people at home, what's Midas implementation?
I'm pretty excited about that, and I know Mr. Pringer's excited, because I'm excited, since I got
There's
here.
one person in the room who's giddy over this, that'd be Dr. Murillo. Midas is a data visualization platform, and a little history quickly. We had a product we really liked about 7 or 8 years ago. That company was purchased, and the product was end-of-lifed. That product was Pearson Informed. Since then, we've been looking for something. We have lots and lots of data available to us, but the analysis and visualization of that data is critical in order to make good information and informed decisions from all of this data that we collect. We've been using a product called Insights.io, which has met our needs to some degree at a cost of about, and these are round numbers, around $35,000 a year. When the superintendent, when Dr. Murillo came 2 years ago, she asked for some things that this product just won't do. She was used to a more powerful data visualization tool that would create a dashboard for her, a way for her to look at the data on a daily basis that would allow her to keep her fingers on the pulse of the district and know what's going on. And I think between Dr. Vorthman and Dr. Shudak and I and Mr. McGreevy, we've looked and had to say, we're looking. We actually, serendipity a little bit, the Area Education Agency had the exact same problem, and they were out looking for that as well. And I saw Dr. Jason Plord, and he said, hey, I saw this tool. And the next thing he said is the AA is going to help support it financially. So between those two things, it ended up being a pretty good deal. So what we would have been spending around $35,000 to $40,000 a year for is going to be reduced by a third or a little bit more by the AA subsidy. And in addition to that, we'll be able to use the resources of the AA for training and support as well. So it's really, really a good deal. In the first year, it's going to save us about 50% of what it would have cost for really a magnificent tool. We hope to show Dr. Murillo her first data dashboard on or around August 27th. So that's our plan.
Thank you.
Before us now is a resolution to approve an agreement with the Green Hills Area Education Agency and the district agreement for the Midas implementation. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes.
Mr. Grove?
Yes.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes, and the resolution has been approved. Before us now is an agreement with Tri-Centers Community School District.
Move to approve submission of application for cooperative sponsorship with Tri-Center Community School District.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion?
We're gonna have a great swim team. No.
We're excited again, because I'm getting swimmers,
Come
so
on.
we're really excited that the rural districts are wanting to partner. I think that just begins to open the door of trust between us, and to see that we can support each other.
It's great.
Does this limit in any way the ability of our kids to attend due to just numbers of swimmers?
No. In fact, we had parents my first year that were very concerned about our swim program, wanting to see increased numbers. And I think once we see other students starting to, and really to get some excitement and spirit around, may encourage more of our students, yeah.
Okay, before us now is the approval of the agreement with the Tri-Center Community School District. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. Grove?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw?
Yes.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes, and the resolution has been approved. Now before us is the approval of our roofing and tuck pointing projects for the bids.
Yeah, I move we approve the sending of bids to 8/13 of 2019 for various roof projects and the tuck pointing project at Longfellow.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? We'll move directly to the vote then for the approval of to send bids for roofing and tuck pointing projects. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes.
Mr. Grove?
Yes.
And Mr. Kazire?
Yes, and the resolution has been approved. Now we have an opportunity to have a resolution to talk about our legislative priorities for the upcoming legislative session. Is there a motion?
I'd move that the board approve the following 2020 legislative priorities: protection of school funding for public schools, timely, equitable, and adequate school funding, funding for mental health supports for students, and funding for college credit attainment during the summer.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
I think that last one was a very good addition. Like the state probably needs to recognize that school districts have to evolve and change just like everything else, and this is one way that we are better serving students and preparing them for college and career.
And to help them see that just because our school year may end in May, learning doesn't stop. And opportunities for students continue. So I'm hoping that it'll get some traction.
Okay, before us now is the approval of our legislative priorities for the 2020 legislative session. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw?
Yes.
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. Grove?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
And Mr. Kazire?
Yes, and the resolution has been approved. Before us now is our consent agenda. Is there a motion?
Move to approve consent agenda as presented.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion?
I guess the one on number F with the Underwood MOU, is there a reason that it's 3 students for, is that just what have historically been there?
Yes, it's been the seats that they've historically had. They haven't always filled them, have they, Mr. Hamilton?
No,
But they-
typically, I remember standing here last year and saying they haven't filled them in a couple of years. This last year, we did have 3 students from Underwood who came. All of them were in similar situations, that they were credit deficient and they were coming to earn extra credits. So 3 has been the number for years, and that's just what we set out. And they pay for them whether they come or not.
Do we have MOUs with other districts as well for this? For
Not in
Canesville?
not in regards to Canesville. This is
Okay.
the only one.
Oh, we could.
Okay, before us now is the approval of our consent agenda. Mr. Wilson, would you please call the roll?
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes.
Mr. Grove?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes, and the motion has been approved. Prior to tonight's meeting, we had a work session regarding the importance of professional development for our teaching and learning staff. And we had a really good discussion on how we as board members can be a strong advocate for the implementation of high-quality professional development program. And we're looking at ways in which we can be more visible and stronger advocates for that professional development model. And so we'll hear more of that in the future, of what we as a board are going to be doing to support professional development in our district. With that, we are adjourned.